story begins in a kitchen that smelled of sugar, butter, and spice, a place where sweetness disguised cruelty. In the grand houses of the plantations, desserts were the symbols of wealth and refinement, their golden crusts and sugared fruits masking the blood and suffering that made them possible. The masters and mistresses delighted in cakes frosted with imported sugar, puddings heavy with cream, and candied nuts glazed until they glistened like jewels. These treats, carried to polished tables on silver trays, were more than food. They were indulgent rituals of power, moments of comfort that affirmed their place above those who served them. Yet for those forced to prepare them, the kitchen was a prison of fire, sweat, and servitude. Into this world stepped Judith, an enslaved woman whose gift for flavor was both a curse and a hidden weapon. Her hands created desserts that brought sighs of pleasure to those who dined, but within her eyes flickered something unspoken. For Judith knew that every grain of sugar had been bought with chains, and that sweetness could be turned into bitterness, indulgence into death. The same desserts that filled the masters with delight could, in time, be the instruments of their undoing. And so, in the clatter of bowls and the hiss of boiling pots, Judith began to weave a secret tale of resistance, hidden in the folds of pastry and the spoonfuls of pudding. The kitchen of a plantation was no ordinary room. It was a crucible of survival and silent war. Flames roared in the hearth, copper pots simmered with stews, and ovens baked loaves for feasts the enslaved would never taste. It was here that Judith spent her days, commanded to craft delights for people who saw her not as human but as property. Yet this confinement also gave her rare access to sugar barrels shipped from distant ports, to spices carried across oceans, and to the secrets of life and death hidden in herbs and roots. Unlike the fields where the lash ruled openly, the kitchen was a place of subtle rebellion, where small acts of defiance could hide behind the cover of service. Judith mastered the art of precision. Too much salt could ruin a dish, but just enough of another substance could ruin a man. She learned the delicate balance between flavor and poison, between sweetness and silence. While her overseers boasted of her talents, seeing only a servant who brought prestige to their table, they never realized that every pie and pudding was also a weapon waiting to be unsheathed. The kitchen, to them, was the heart of the household. To Judith, it became the battlefield where she could wage her secret war. Sugar itself carried a history steeped in cruelty. Entire plantations existed for the purpose of refining it, and it was the backbone of empires that thrived on the misery of enslaved laborers. Every spoonful stirred into coffee, every dusting across a pie, was a taste of exploitation. For the masters, sugar was luxury. For Judith, it was memory, of men broken in the cane fields, of women collapsed under the weight of harvest baskets, of lives chewed up so that others might live in decadent ease. In her desserts, she carried the irony of her existence, crafting sweetness for those who had stolen everything from her. But Judith also carried knowledge, passed down from her mother, who had whispered secrets of herbs and plants. She knew that the natural world offered both medicine and death. Nutmeg could warm the body, but too much could bring visions and madness. Bitter roots could soothe pain or stop a heart. Judith never forgot these lessons. Each time she measured sugar for a custard or stirred syrup into a pudding, she thought of the ways sweetness could disguise something far darker. For the masters, sugar meant pleasure. For Judith, it meant power waiting to be claimed. At first, Judith's hands moved like any other cook's, dutiful, precise, unquestioned. Yet inside her grew a seed of vengeance, watered by the daily humiliations she endured. Every cruel word, every reminder that her body and labor were not her own, hardened her resolve. She realized that within the walls of the kitchen, she had something none of the field workers had: direct access to the master's mouths. They trusted her implicitly, praising her skill, never imagining that the same hands kneading dough could also knead their fate. Dessert, to them, was a symbol of leisure, a reward at the end of a feast. To Judith, it became an opportunity. She began to dream of recipes not only to delight but to destroy. The thought lingered like the smell of cinnamon in the air. What if the very sweetness they demanded became the source of their downfall? What if each bite of cake carried not only sugar but justice? The idea grew, bold and unstoppable, until it became her truth. Judith would not strike with blade or fire. She would strike with sweetness, crafting desserts so irresistible that her enemies would beg for the very dishes that would end their lives. Judith's story began not in the kitchen but in the violence of separation. She was born into bondage, a child whose first lullabies were the cries of mothers mourning children sold away. Her earliest memories were not of home but of loss. The sudden disappearance of familiar faces, the hollow ache of absence that settled like a weight in her chest. As a young girl, she was spared the backbreaking cane fields not out of mercy but utility. The mistress of the house noticed her small, careful hands and sharp eyes, and so Judith was brought into the kitchen. It was there that she learned discipline, the constant surveillance of overseers, the need to anticipate demands before they were voiced, and the importance of silence. Yet silence was not emptiness. In those quiet moments when she was sent to fetch spices or grind herbs, she absorbed knowledge. She watched how ingredients transformed under heat, how flavors mingled, how the masters marveled at dishes she had helped create. In those moments, Judith's childhood dissolved into something harder, sharper. She grew not just into a servant but into an observer, one who learned to read the patterns of the household, who held power, who showed weakness, and how food bound them all together. Life in the kitchen demanded invisibility. Judith was present at every feast and yet unseen, a shadow moving behind the glitter of silverware and candlelight. She carried platters laden with roast meats, pitchers of sweet punch, and delicate desserts glazed to perfection. But her face was rarely remembered by those who consumed them. To the masters and their guests, she was simply the cook, a background figure as interchangeable as the plates she served upon. Yet invisibility carried its own strange freedom. When people believe you do not matter, they speak openly in your presence. Judith overheard secrets, whispers of debts, quarrels over land, confessions of cruelty shared in drunken laughter. She became a living archive of her oppressor's sins, her silence recording every word. At night, when the kitchen fire dimmed and only embers glowed, Judith replayed these conversations in her mind. She realized that the people who claimed ownership over her were riddled with fears and flaws. They argued like children, betrayed one another, and clung to luxuries to hide their decay. To them, she was a shadow. But in her heart, Judith knew that shadows could consume the light. Judith's position in the kitchen placed her at a rare crossroads between two worlds. On one side was the white household, demanding endless refinement and perfection. On the other side were her fellow enslaved, whose resilience carried traditions from Africa, whispered songs, and fragments of healing knowledge. From them she inherited wisdom, the use of bitter herbs to ease childbirth pains, the crushed leaves that could calm fever, the root that numbed pain but in greater measure stopped the heart. These lessons were taught not in books but in hushed exchanges under moonlight, passed down like contraband memory. The kitchen became the meeting place of these two inheritances. European recipes of puddings and pastries collided with African knowledge of earth and root. Judith learned to fold them together. Ginger blended into sweet breads, cassava into cakes, and, when needed, poison hidden in custard. Her skill was not only culinary but alchemical, turning the oppressive demands of her masters into tools for her own quiet rebellion. She embodied a dual identity. Outwardly the obedient servant, inwardly the keeper of dangerous knowledge, both healer and executioner waiting for the right moment. As the years passed, Judith's resolve hardened in the same way sugar crystallizes under heat. Each humiliation became fuel, each cruel order another spark. She endured the daily degradations, the stolen hours, the mocking laughter, the endless demands for more sweetness at the table. But she never forgot that she was more than what they saw. Her invisibility, her silence, her skill with food, all became armor. The kitchen fire burned day and night, and Judith felt a fire burning inside her, one that no overseer could extinguish. She had seen women collapse under lashes, men broken by chains, children stolen into the night. She had seen the plantation's wealth built upon the ruin of her people. And she had decided, deep within herself, that she would not remain powerless. She could not lead armies or break chains with brute force, but she held a weapon more insidious: the trust of her captors and the food that passed their lips. While others prayed for deliverance, Judith sharpened her vengeance with every knife she used, every spoon she stirred. She was the shadow they ignored, the fire they did not fear. Yet, soon, they would taste her silence, sweetened with sugar and sharpened with death. Judith had by now become the unchallenged master of the plantation kitchen. Her cakes rose higher, her puddings melted smoother, her pies drew sighs of satisfaction from every guest who touched fork to crust. The mistress of the house often boasted to visitors that she possessed the most talented cook in the parish, and Judith was paraded as proof of the plantation's refinement, though never as a woman with a name, only as property. But in those praises lay Judith's strength. The more the masters trusted her, the more freedom she gained in selecting ingredients, experimenting with flavors, and commanding the rhythm of the kitchen. What no one suspected was that within her mind, recipes took on dual meanings. To the household, she measured sugar and cream. To herself, she measured opportunity. Nutmeg and cinnamon could mask bitterness. Almond essence could disguise the faintest aftertaste of certain powders. A spoon of molasses could thicken both sweetness and silence. Judith's artistry was not just in taste but in concealment. Every dessert she prepared carried the possibility of transformation. From luxury to lethal, from indulgence to instrument. She understood that her power lay not in brute force but in patience and precision. Like a weaver threading her loom, she began crafting a tapestry of revenge, one dish at a time. Judith knew that poison alone was not enough. It had to be masked, hidden so carefully that not even the sharpest tongue could detect its presence. She became a scientist in secrecy, testing on small portions when no one watched. Bitter herbs were crushed fine, their sharpness dulled with syrup. Crushed seeds with dangerous properties were roasted and folded into nut cakes, indistinguishable from the flavor of almonds. Even the choice of dessert became a strategy. Rich custards, heavy with cream and eggs, could carry powders without suspicion. Thick fruit preserves could cloak substances that might otherwise leave a trace. She was meticulous, ensuring that her methods left no pattern that might be discovered. Sometimes she delayed for weeks, serving harmless desserts to build trust, to disarm suspicion. Then, when the moment was right, she introduced the fatal sweetness. Each experiment refined her art. Each success emboldened her. Judith moved with the patience of one who knew that vengeance was not a single act but a slow harvest. Her enemies believed themselves safe, laughing over her puddings and pies, never realizing that every bite was a wager with death. The first victim was not chosen at random but selected with care. A plantation owner notorious for cruelty, who delighted in tormenting those bound to him. Judith prepared his favorite dessert, a custard laced with nutmeg, cinnamon, and cream so thick it clung to the spoon like velvet. Hidden within its sweetness was a measured dose of a bitter root, ground fine and invisible. The man devoured it greedily, licking the spoon clean, praising Judith's skill with the same tongue that had cursed her people hours before. Days later, he collapsed, his body racked with fever and pain. Doctors muttered of strange sickness, of corrupted humors, of heat stroke, but never of poison. Judith remained silent, her expression one of obedience, even concern. But inside, she carried a cold satisfaction. The first strike had landed. No suspicion touched her. The household even thanked her for tending the kitchen while the master wasted away. She had discovered the perfection of her method. The kitchen was her stage, the table her battlefield, and dessert her silent dagger. With the success of the first death, Judith's plan expanded. She no longer saw desserts as mere tasks but as weapons in her arsenal, each tailored to the weakness of its intended target. For one plantation lord who adored candied fruits, she prepared glistening slices of orange, their syrup infused with a toxin that worked slowly, leaving the man weakened over weeks. For another, who prided himself on his appetite for pies, she served a berry tart whose juices carried death masked in sweetness. Judith varied her methods so no pattern could be traced, ensuring each victim fell under different circumstances. Some died suddenly, clutching their stomachs. Others lingered, their decline attributed to fever or bad fortune. Rumors spread among the elite of curses, of strange sickness stalking the land. None thought to suspect the quiet woman in the kitchen, who continued to serve with lowered eyes and steady hands. Judith's art was more than killing. It was deception, mastery, performance. Each dessert was both a masterpiece and a murder, a recipe written not in ink but in blood. By the time whispers began to grow louder, 8 plantation masters had fallen. Their last taste on earth a sweetness crafted by the woman they never truly saw. Judith did not act out of haste or impulse. Her first strike was chosen with the precision of a hunter. Among the neighboring plantation owners, there was one whose reputation for cruelty surpassed the rest. He was known for lashings that left men scarred for life, for tearing children from their mother's arms without hesitation, for boasting that fear was the truest form of governance. Judith had seen the aftermath of his wrath, the broken backs, the haunted eyes, the empty beds of the sold. To strike him was not just vengeance but justice. She studied his habits carefully. He was a man of excess, a glutton with a taste for rich custards and puddings dripping with cream. Every gathering, every feast, his demand was the same. Bring me the custard, thick and sweet. It was in this appetite that Judith saw her opening. The plan took weeks of quiet preparation, not only to craft the perfect dish but to ensure no suspicion could fall on her. She waited until the household was distracted with harvest business, when the bustle of work would mask her careful additions to the dessert. Then, with the calm of someone folding sugar into cream, Judith folded death into sweetness. The custard was golden, its surface sprinkled with nutmeg and cinnamon, the scent filling the dining hall like a promise. Judith carried it to the table with the same grace she had always shown, head bowed, eyes lowered. To the masters she was invisible, a servant, a shadow. To Judith she was executioner. The man scooped the custard greedily, his spoon clinking against the porcelain, his lips smacking with delight. Each bite was a hymn to her skill, though he never knew that every mouthful carried the poison of his undoing. Judith did not flinch as he devoured it. Her face betrayed no secret. Around the table, laughter rang, wine spilled, and the air filled with chatter. But Judith's focus was singular. She noted the speed with which he ate, the satisfaction on his face, the ignorance in his eyes. By the time the custard bowl was scraped clean, the sentence had been sealed. He praised the dish, declaring it the finest ever tasted, unknowingly offering his last compliment to the woman who had just written his death. The poison did not strike immediately. That was Judith's genius. Sudden death might invite suspicion, but a slow, creeping illness could be dismissed as fate. Days after the feast, the master complained of heat in his stomach, of cramps that twisted his body. His skin grew pale, then flushed, sweat pouring as though fire consumed him from within. Doctors were summoned, their bags clinking with glass bottles and bitter tonics. They muttered about fever, bad air, the humors of the body misaligned. They bled him, leeched him, purged him, but nothing eased his suffering. Judith, summoned often to the sick room, played her role with perfection. She carried cool cloths, fetched water, and even prepared small meals, all the while wearing the mask of concern. No one questioned her loyalty. In the shadows of the chamber, she watched him writhe, every gasp and groan a quiet symphony of justice. The household whispered of curses, of divine punishment, but never of the dessert bowl emptied days before. For Judith, the silence was triumph. When the man finally died, his household was plunged into chaos. Wails echoed from the main house, servants rushed to and fro, and news spread like fire through the countryside. The mighty master, dead of sudden illness. His funeral was lavish, a display of wealth and piety, but beneath the grandeur lay fear. Other plantation owners spoke in hushed tones, uneasy at how swiftly death had struck one of their own. Judith moved among them unseen, carrying trays of food for mourners, her face as still as carved stone. Inside, however, her heart thundered, not with fear, but with a cold, steady satisfaction. The first death had proven what she had long believed, that power could be undone not with chains or whips, but with sweetness. The master had tasted delight, never knowing it was his undoing. Judith knew then that her plan was not just possible but unstoppable. She had turned the kitchen, once her prison, into her battlefield. She had written her vengeance into a recipe. And as the mourners raised their glasses and whispered prayers, Judith silently planned her next dish, already envisioning which cruel mouth would be the next to savor death disguised as dessert. The first death unsettled the plantations like a storm cloud lingering on the horizon. Men who once boasted of their invincibility now spoke in whispers, uneasy that one of their own had fallen so suddenly. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed it was the wrath of God for sins too great to name. Others muttered about curses carried across the ocean, vengeance of the enslaved that could not be bound by chains. No one dared suggest poison. It seemed unthinkable that those they considered beneath them could wield such cunning. Judith moved through this atmosphere like a shadow, her head bowed, her hands steady, her presence overlooked. Yet within her burned a fierce clarity. The first strike had not only avenged countless cruelties but had cloaked her in deeper invisibility. The household praised her for loyalty during the illness, and her reputation as a devoted cook only grew. It was this trust so blind, so arrogant, that became her shield. And so she planned again. The curse the masters whispered about would soon take more of them, though its true author walked quietly among them, carrying trays of sweetness. The next victims came swiftly, chosen with equal care. One was a man famed for his love of candied fruit. Judith prepared a platter of oranges, sliced and boiled in syrup until they gleamed like sunlight. Beneath their brightness lay a bitterness he could not taste. He ate greedily, savoring the sticky sweetness, never knowing it would sour into death. His decline was slower than the first, stretching into weeks of weakness and pain. By the time he was gone, whispers had thickened. Illness stalked the plantations. The third death followed before the shock could fade. This master loved berry pies, their juices staining his lips red as wine. Judith served him a tart filled with berries gathered fresh, laced with powder ground so fine it dissolved unseen. He died quicker, in a fit of agony that left his household convinced of evil spirits. 3 gone, each by a dessert they adored. Still, suspicion never fell upon the quiet cook. Instead, the fear of curses grew stronger, until even the boldest of men hesitated to feast too freely. Judith, however, served on, each dish delivered with bowed head, each recipe another step in her silent war. By now, Judith's methods had become a rhythm, as steady as kneading dough or stirring syrup. For the fourth master, who prided himself on his appetite for rich puddings, she prepared a dish thickened with cream and eggs, infused with a substance that worked slowly, leaving him hollowed and wasted. For the fifth, who relished candied nuts, she glazed almonds until they sparkled, hiding within them the power to stop his breath. For the sixth, a man fond of sugared wine, she brewed a sweet cordial laced with poison so subtle it was indistinguishable from flavor. Each death was attributed to chance, to illness, to misfortune. The doctors spoke of fever, of stomach rot, of unexplained weakness. The wives wept and crossed themselves, muttering of curses. All the while Judith remained the constant presence. The cook, the servant, the unseen. Yet among the enslaved, whispers carried differently. Though no one dared speak openly, there were knowing glances, quiet nods, the shared recognition that justice was being served not in courts but in kitchens. Judith's desserts had become a secret hymn, sung in silence but felt in every soul longing for deliverance. Desserts, in the world of Judith, were more than indulgence, they were symbols. To the masters, sweetness meant comfort, excess, and luxury. To Judith, sweetness became the perfect disguise, a mask under which she could hide her fury. This duality is what gave her story its power. Sugar was both a tool of oppression and the weapon of liberation. Every spoonful of custard, every glazed fruit, every sugared cake carried the weight of history. Judith understood that power often cloaked itself in beauty, that cruelty wore the mask of refinement. So she turned that mask back upon her oppressors, forcing them to choke on their own luxuries. Her desserts became parables of survival, lessons written not in ink but in taste, reminding us that even the smallest acts of rebellion can strike deep at the heart of tyranny. Though her name was never recorded in official histories, Judith lived on in whispers, in fireside tales, in the half-spoken legends passed from one generation to the next. To the enslaved, she was not just a cook. She was justice in an apron, resistance in silence. Mothers told daughters that sweetness could be strength, that kitchens could be battlegrounds, that even chains could not silence a clever mind. In the shadows of oppression, her story became a light, proof that power was not absolute, that the oppressor's trust could become their downfall. Whether she survived to old age or perished at the gallows, Judith's true survival was in memory. Her recipes, deadly and delicious, became symbols of defiance, a mythology of sugar and vengeance that no overseer could whip away. Judith's tale also reveals the deeper truth about food. It is never just nourishment. It can be domination, as when masters forced enslaved people to cook meals they could not eat. It can be rebellion, as when enslaved cooks salted food heavily so it spoiled, or slipped away scraps to the hungry. And in Judith's hands, it became execution. Food binds life and death more intimately than weapons, because every man must eat, every woman must drink. The master's arrogance lay in believing that their mouths were invulnerable, that what sustained them could never destroy them. Judith shattered that illusion. Her desserts remind us that power often overlooks the most ordinary places, never suspecting that the spoonful of sweetness could carry justice sharper than any blade that in the end, Judith's story is not just about 8 dead plantation masters. It is about the triumph of invisibility turned into power. She was the shadow they ignored, the servant they dismissed, the hands they praised but never honored. And it was precisely in that dismissal that she found her freedom to strike. Her life, lived in chains, became a testament to resistance, proving that even within the darkest systems, rebellion could flourish. When the masters whispered of curses, they were right, though they never understood its source. The curse was not divine wrath, nor mysterious illness. It was Judith herself, her patience, her cunning, her refusal to remain powerless. Her desserts were delicious, yes, but they were also deadly, the last taste of arrogance swallowed by those who believed themselves untouchable. And long after their feasts ended, her story remained. A reminder that sometimes justice comes not with the roar of battle, but with the quiet sweetness of a spoonful of sugar.